maybe it's better if I die and this is all over. But then I worried about the kids. I said, I can't do that to them. I have to try to protect them too.
Did you want to live?
I did.
Did you stand your ground?
I did.
Were you in your own home?
Yeah, I was.
Did you defend yourself that day?
I did.
Did you believe that you were in imminent risk of death or great bodily harm?
Objection. Call for a legal conclusion. Rephrase the question.
Did you believe that Terry Thompson would kill you if you didn't defend yourself?
Yes.
On the morning of August 9th, 2019, a shocking act of violence took place in a seemingly normal home in Florida. Maria Thompson, a 44-year-old U.S. Customs agent, shot and killed her husband, Terry Thompson, in their living room while he relaxed on the couch. What seemed like a cold-blooded murder quickly unraveled into something far more complex. Was this truly a case of premeditated murder? Or was Maria driven to the unthinkable by years of abuse, fear, and desperation? This case divided many, sparking debates about self-defense, mental health, and the consequences of living in constant terror. Stick with me as we break down the tragic events leading up to that fateful morning and explore the aftermath that left a family shattered. But before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our gripping true crime documentaries. Let's get started. Maria Thompson met Terry in 2000 while she was still at the University of Florida. She was 20 and Terry, 13 years her senior, exuded confidence. At first, their relationship seemed innocent enough. They were friends, and then they began dating. But what started as a seemingly innocent relationship soon turned into something much more complicated. Their love story was long distance for years, but it was clear from the beginning that Terry had a dominating personality. Maria, eager to be loved, often overlooked the red flags. She'd never had a serious relationship before, and Terry appeared to offer everything she was looking for: confidence, charm, and the promise of a stable future. In 2007, the couple got engaged, but things soon began to shift. Terry's behavior became controlling. He dictated how Maria dressed, who she saw, where she worked. He began criticizing her constantly, accusing her of not being good enough, of failing as a wife, a mother, and even as a woman. What began as small criticisms gradually grew into harsh, verbal assaults. And as the years went by, Terry's words turned to physical threats. He would tell Maria she wasn't good enough, that she could never make him happy, and often followed these insults with violent outbursts. He would hit her and then apologize, promising to change, but he never did. This pattern of abuse only worsened over time. By the time they were married in 2008, their relationship was already marked by tension and violence. For years, Terry's anger was a constant in their home. He would lash out physically and emotionally, and Maria, despite her fear and pain, would forgive him, each time hoping things might get better. After each attack, he would tell her he'd never do it again, but he always did. Their two children, ages 6 and 7, grew up in an environment where they could hear their father's outbursts and witness their mother's distress. Maria, stuck in a cycle of abuse, believed she had no choice but to stay. She feared what might happen if she left. As Terry's anger escalated, so did her sense of fear. She became more and more isolated from friends and family, trying desperately to keep the peace for the sake of her children. But that peace was constantly shattered by Terry's volatility. The marriage, once full of promise, became a trap that Maria couldn't escape, until one fateful morning, everything changed at 1 a.m. on August 9th, 2019. Maria was still awake, her exhaustion weighing on her as she tried to keep her husband company over phone. Terry was driving home after a long shift, and though Maria had managed to get a few hours of sleep, she knew she had to get ready for her own early morning shift as a customs agent. The conversation, however, was anything but peaceful. They had been arguing for hours, a constant back and forth of accusations and insults. Terry's frustration was palpable, and his anger had been building for some time. By the time Terry finally arrived home around 2 a.m., He brought his bad mood with him. He was furious, carrying the hostility from their phone call into the house. The moment he walked through the door, he unleashed his anger on Maria. He didn't even let her settle in before he began berating her. She could barely get a word in as he raged about everything wrong in their marriage, everything that he believed Maria had done wrong. His voice echoed through their home as she stood there, trying to maintain some sense of composure, while the verbal attacks hit her over and over again. Maria, though exhausted, tried to prepare herself for work. Her uniform, already laid out, became her armor as she dressed and gathered her things. Every movement she made seemed to irritate Terry more, and his insults became louder and more personal. He accused her of being a failure, of not being a good wife or mother, and worse. As she made her way through the routine of getting ready, she continued to endure his harsh words, each one cutting deeper. By 6 a.m., the couple's argument showed no signs of slowing down. Maria, already drained from a sleepless night and the ongoing verbal assault, was just trying to focus on getting to the next few hours. She had been hoping the tension would ease, that the argument would somehow end. But Terry only seemed more determined to tear her down, pushing her to the edge as she prepared for the day ahead. And then, in the midst of it all, the argument shifted. As Maria stood there, getting ready for work, the last thing she expected was for the situation to escalate in the way it did. What started as verbal violence would soon erupt into something far worse. Terry's threats grew more severe, and for Maria, the fear she had lived with for so long suddenly turned into something more real than ever before. She was about to face a moment that would change everything. AT 6:10 a.m. The situation reached its breaking point. In a panic-fueled moment, Maria picked up the phone and dialed 911. Her voice was shaky but clear as she spoke to the dispatcher. .911 emergency. What's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. Maria's voice trembled as she quickly responded, Yes, I need the police at my house on Merlot Boulevard in Lockhart. I just shot my husband. He was trying to kill me. The dispatcher tried to keep her calm, asking for details. Can you tell me where you shot him? I don't know, a lot of times. In the front and the back, Maria explained, her voice strained and filled with fear. The dispatcher instructed Maria to check for signs of life and perform CPR if necessary. But Maria hesitated. I'm scared to go over. I don't want to put myself in harm's way. She confessed. The dispatcher reassured her, urging her to stay safe. That I understand. Just make sure you're safe. Is there any other weapons nearby? Maria's voice shook again as she described the environment. There's a machete in the room and another gun in the closet. But no, he didn't have a weapon on him. As the dispatcher continued to guide her, Maria revealed she was wearing her service weapon, her uniform already on. She confirmed that the gun she used to shoot Terry was still holstered on her, though she was advised to set aside before deputies arrived. Maria complied and carefully placed her firearm on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Despite the chaos of the situation, Maria remained cooperative, her words coming in short bursts. She kept her eyes on Terry, who lay gasping on the floor, his body still as she watched from the kitchen. I'm scared. He tried to kill me, Maria repeated. When the police arrived, Maria was seen standing at the front door, wearing her uniform, calm but with no visible signs of injury. There were no tears, no frantic movements, just a woman staring ahead, lost in the reality of what had just transpired as the officers moved quickly to secure the scene. They took Maria into custody without resistance. Despite the shock of what had happened, she didn't fight, didn't argue. She simply complied, asking about her children.
Take one by number attached to the call. I don't need the 14.
Protect the babies.
Ensuring someone was called to care for them. The tension in the air was heavy, but Maria remained eerily calm. Even as the officers took control of the situation as deputies and crime scene investigators entered the Thompson home, the gravity of the situation became clear. Terry Thompson's body was found face down in the living room, just a few feet from the couch where he had been sitting earlier. His body was still in an outstretched position, his limbs sprawled as if he had fallen suddenly from a couch. Beside him lay the blanket he had been covered with, a pillow and a laptop. It was clear that Terry had been caught off guard, relaxed in his underwear, when the violence erupted. The coroner would later confirm that Terry had been shot a total of 9 times. 2 shots hit him in the chest while he was still seated on the couch. It seemed that as he tried to defend himself, he raised his left arm, blocking a 3rd shot. But the remaining 6 shots came after he had fallen to ground, his back now exposed to Maria. Each of those 6 shots hit their mark, striking his back with precision. There were no signs of Terry trying to escape or fight back. In fact, his body showed no signs of movement that would suggest a struggle, nothing that pointed to self-defense. The shots were all carefully placed, indicating an execution-like quality to the attack. This raised serious doubts about Maria's claim of fear for her life. In self-defense situations, the expectation is typically that a person would try to avoid harm, not shoot someone as they fall to the ground. Around the house, investigators found several potential weapons. A second gun was securely locked away in a safe, out of Terry's reach at the time of his death. A machete sat in the bedroom, and a golf club rested near the couch where Terry had been sitting. But there were no weapons within his immediate reach, especially not the kind that would explain the lethal force Maria used. Despite what Maria had claimed about Terry having access to weapons, investigators found no evidence of a weapon being near him when the shots were fired. The police also examined the area where the shooting took place, finding 9 spent shell casings along the wall. A bullet-resistant vest, which Maria had mentioned earlier in her statement, was found draped over the opposite side of the couch. However, no weapon was discovered under Terry's body, as some had speculated might be the case. All the evidence pointed to a very different story than the one Maria had told. Maria had explained to detectives that she was fearful for her life, that she had acted in self-defense. She told them she shot Terry because he had threatened to kill her, but the evidence at the scene painted a starkly different picture. There was no weapon in Terry's immediate vicinity, and there was no sign that he had been in a position to cause immediate harm to Maria. The placement of the shots, the lack of physical evidence of an imminent threat, and the calmness with which Maria cooperated all suggested that her claims of self-defense were questionable. As investigators continued to piece together the evidence, it became clear that this case was far more complex than a simple act of self-defense. Maria's story was already starting to unravel under the weight of the physical evidence. Maria Thompson was arrested under suspicion of first-degree murder just hours after the shooting. The initial evidence suggested a premeditated act rather than a reaction to an immediate threat, and law enforcement had serious doubts about her self-defense claim. She was placed under house arrest while awaiting trial, and the legal battle that followed would revolve around whether she had acted in self-defense or whether she had simply reached the breaking point after years of abuse. That Maria's defense team leaned heavily on the argument that she was suffering from battered spouse syndrome and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They argued that years of physical, emotional, and psychological abuse at the hands of her husband had left Maria in a constant state of fear. They pointed to the many instances of Terry's violent behavior over the years, detailing how he controlled her life, belittled her, and threatened her on numerous occasions. The defense also claimed that the threat of harm from Terry was so ingrained in Maria's psyche that, even when no immediate danger was present, she perceived his presence as a lethal threat. TO support this defense. Several friends, family members, and experts took the stand. Maria's family testified to the ongoing abuse they had witnessed, recounting incidents where Terry had threatened to harm Maria and even their children. Her grandmother described how Terry had once called her, accusing Maria of infidelity and then threatening to kill her. Other witnesses spoke about how Terry's anger and jealousy controlled the household, how he made Maria's life unbearable with constant accusations and intimidation. In addition to these testimonies, a forensic psychologist testified that Maria met the criteria for battered spouse syndrome, explaining that years of living in fear could distort a person's perception of immediate danger. The psychologist argued that Maria likely believed she was in imminent threat of death or severe harm from Terry that morning, even though the evidence suggested otherwise. On the other side, the prosecution painted a different picture. They argued that Maria's actions were not those of a person in immediate danger, but rather those of a woman who had become fed up with her abusive husband. They pointed to the fact that she had 15 minutes to think through the situation while getting ready for work, a period they argued was ample time for her to assess the situation rationally. The prosecution emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime, noting that Maria had planned and executed the murder with precision, delivering multiple shots to Terry's body, even after he had fallen to the floor. There was no sign of an immediate threat, they argued, and no sign that Terry had any weapon within reach when the shots were fired as the trial progressed. Both sides focused on the emotional and psychological states of Maria and Terry. The defense painted Terry as an abusive, controlling figure who had broken Maria down over the years, while the prosecution highlighted Maria's calm demeanor in the aftermath of the shooting and the lack of evidence to support her self-defense claims. The emotional weight of the case was undeniable, with both sides trying to convince the jury of the truth of their respective stories. In their closing statements, the prosecution argued that while Terry's behavior may have been reprehensible, that did not justify Maria taking his life when no immediate threat existed. They claimed she had acted out of anger and frustration, not out of fear for her life. The defense, however, insisted that Maria's perception of danger had been shaped by years of abuse, and that she truly believed she was defending herself and her children from Terry's violent threats. The jury now had the difficult task of determining whether Maria Thompson had acted in self-defense or whether her actions were driven by something darker, resentment, anger, or a desire to end the abusive cycle once and for all. After 6 days of tense deliberations, the jury returned their verdict. In the case of Maria Thompson, the courtroom fell silent as the judge asked for the decision. We, the jury, find defendant, Maria Thompson, not guilty of first-degree murder. A wave of disbelief and relief washed over Maria as the words sank in. After years of living in the shadow of abuse and months of facing a trial that threatened to destroy what remained of her family, the verdict brought an unexpected sense of freedom. But the road to this moment had been long and emotionally taxing. During the trial, Maria had been confined to house arrest, restricted by an ankle monitor that kept her isolated from the outside world. She had spent over 5 years waiting for this day, away from her children, who had been living separately with relatives during the course of the trial. Maria had missed birthdays, holidays, and important milestones in their lives. The separation from her children, especially in the face of such uncertainty, had taken a tremendous emotional toll on her. Despite the trauma, Maria never stopped fighting for her children. She maintained regular contact with them during the trial, but nothing could replace the void of not being with them. Her heart ached every time they asked when she would come home. Her defense team had tried to make the best case for her, but Maria knew that only the jury could decide whether she could be a mother to them again, or whether her past actions would define her future. When the verdict was read, Maria's thoughts immediately turned to her children. She was overwhelmed with emotion, knowing that her journey was far from over. But the hardest chapter had come to an end. After the trial, Maria was finally able to reunite with her children. They could now live under the same roof again, the family reunited after years of uncertainty. The bond between mother and children was irreplaceable, but rebuilding that trust and stability would take time. Though Maria's legal battle had been won, the emotional scars of the years of abuse and the trauma of the trial remained. The Thompson family, though physically reunited, would face an ongoing journey of healing. Maria spoke publicly after the trial, acknowledging the difficulty of adjusting to life after the ordeal. She was grateful to be back with her children, but she also recognized that the road ahead would involve therapy and emotional support for everyone involved. As for the future, Maria's focus was on rebuilding her family life, supporting her children through their healing process, and learning how to move forward from the chaos that had once defined her world. Despite the painful history, she hoped to find peace and create a new beginning for herself and her children. The case of Maria and Terry Thompson is a tragic reminder of the complexities of domestic abuse, self-defense, and emotional turmoil that can consume a person when they feel trapped in an abusive relationship. For years, Maria endured emotional and physical violence at the hands of her husband, and though her actions on that fateful morning cannot be excused, it's clear that she was living in constant fear. Her story raises questions about the limits of self-defense, the psychological scars of abuse, and the difficult choices people make when they've reached their breaking point and the aftermath of the trial. Maria's life is far from simple. The verdict may have allowed her to reunite with her children, but the emotional toll of the years of abuse and the intense public scrutiny are not things that can be fixed with a single verdict. Maria and her children will now begin the long and challenging process of healing, with therapy playing a crucial role in their recovery. Thank you for joining us in today's examination of a case that touched on so many deep issues. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you can stay updated on all our future content. We appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more true crime stories that explore the complexities of justice, law, and the human condition. See you next time